It's been nearly a month since it hit theaters, but Oppenheimer continues to catch the eyes of moviegoers as the film nears $650 million at the global box office. With the world's attention turned to Los Alamos, more and more people are learning about the start of New Mexico's history with nuclear testing and uranium mining. This week, New Mexico in Focus correspondent Antonia Gonzalez sits down with Leona Morgan, a Navajo woman who's been involved in the anti-nuclear movement for years. As she explains, testing and mining have caused irreparable damage to Native American communities across the state, something that she says Christopher Nolan's film ignores.
Leona, welcome to New Mexico in Focus.
Thank you for having me.
And you're a longtime grassroots advocate, advocating for the health of Navajo people, land, and water. Tell me a little bit about some of the work you've been doing.
Sure, yeah. I used to work for an organization called Eastern Navajo Diné against uranium mining. And I was so proud to say in 2014 we stopped a new uranium mine. Since November last year, that mining project has moved forward a little bit. So that's one of the issues that I'm keeping an eye on. There's also uranium cleanup all over Navajo, and then there's some cleanup that should be happening in the state of New Mexico as well. But what I've really been focusing on the last 6 years is Holtec, this proposal to build a nuclear waste site here, and then just keeping a bird's eye view on most of the nuclear projects in the state and how it affects Indigenous people.
And how has mining, such as uranium, impacted Navajo people, water, land, in your work on the Navajo Nation?
The mining that was done on Navajo, starting in the late 30s, and arguably, whatever's happening today, is all in the name of either nuclear energy or nuclear weapons. And so nuclear weapons was the main reason why we started to mine. But today it's both weapons and energy. And so Navajo Nation has been mined not only to fuel World War II and the Cold War, but basically the United States imperial arsenal of nuclear weapons, along with other Indigenous nations across the country and the world. So uranium is mined on Indigenous lands, we estimate at least 70% of the time worldwide. So the impacts that we're feeling on Navajo, such as contaminated land and water and air, which impacts our human health, and then also our food resources, and then the impacts to our future generations are still being studied. So we're not sure of the long-term implications, but this is happening all over the world wherever uranium is being mined, not just through the extraction of the ore body, but right now we're also looking at ISL mining, which is, it's not fracking, but it's basically extracting directly out of the aquifer. And so there's extraction, processing, and then all of the different steps leading into the fuel fabrication, as well as here in New Mexico we have enrichment and several steps of the nuclear fuel chain. We don't have a nuclear power plant here, but we have 2 national labs, and then the waste isolation pilot plant, which is weapons for weapons waste. But right now, we're looking at also a new waste facility, which was just licensed in May. I don't think that facility will ever open. I'm talking about the Holtec proposal. But yeah, so there's a lot of impacts to our people, even though Navajo is not located all over the state. There's Indigenous nations that were impacted from Los Alamos, the people down south where the waste sites are. There's Indigenous peoples whose lands were stolen there, and then just being in New Mexico, all New Mexicans are impacted by this.
And what is the state of uranium on the Navajo Nation today? There's been some meetings between, well, maybe you can explain that a little bit, between the federal government and Navajo communities.
Well, right now, the Navajo Nation has a law against uranium mining, which is only on Navajo Nation proper. So if anyone is familiar with the checkerboard area, this does not include parcels of land that were taken to build a railroad or during the Dawes Act or just along the path of colonization when our lands were taken by private entities or the state or the federal government. We have all these different land statuses in northwestern New Mexico that make it incredibly difficult for the Navajo Nation to enforce its laws. So there's, since 2002, the Diné Natural Resources Protection Act, which says no new mining on the Navajo Nation. But it's, like I said, there's a lot of loopholes in the jurisdiction. And then in 2012, the Navajo Nation passed a law against transport of new uranium. So that transportation law does not prohibit cleanup, but it's more for production of uranium. So even though we have this ban or the moratorium on uranium mining as well as the transportation law, there is a Canadian company right now doing exploration near Church Rock, close to where the 1979 Church Rock spill happened. And so we are looking at this as illegal drilling. There's a lot of agreements the previous companies had made with the Navajo Nation to do cleanup before new mining would occur, which this new company is not respecting, something we call the Temporary Access Agreement. However, just in a nutshell, there's no new mining, and the US EPA is working with Navajo EPA and several other agencies to clean up what they identify as 523 abandoned uranium mines. So we say AUM for short, but this number, it's identified by the federal government. It's not a true count of all of the contamination on Navajo. And so across the country, arguably there's at least 15,000 abandoned uranium mines, but on Navajo, they're looking at cleaning up these 523, and the course of cleanup is being led mostly from a top-down effort of the federal government telling the Navajo Nation what to do and what the limitations are. Yesterday, I was at a meeting regarding uranium cleanup. In this situation, the federal government is telling the communities you have two options: a no action alternative, or the alternative to clean up one community north of Church Rock by bringing the waste into Thoreau, an area that's not contaminated currently. So essentially, it's history repeating itself, where the federal government is dictating what should be done on our lands, making decisions without the local people at the table. And so the course of cleanup over the last, since the Waxman hearings in 2007, has been inadequate. It's been very top-down, not including the community people at the table, but there's also no clear standards. There's no clear information from the federal government what they're doing. They give presentations, but a lot of the slides are not available online. So it's incredibly difficult for anyone following these issues to come to one place like a central reservoir, either online or a physical location, and get up to date with all of the cleanup, either in Western Agency or Eastern Agency, because Navajo Nation is huge, and there's a lot of cleanup happening all across the reservation, but there's no clear way for community people to input unless they're already involved with the federal government. So someone like me or any Diné resident who wants to learn about these issues, it takes a lot of work to find out what's going on. And so the previous Navajo EPA Executive Director, Daryl Yazzie, he was quite vocal about how he was opposing the federal government dictating to Navajo what they can and cannot do. But he's no longer in his position. And so when people become vocal and speak out, they lose their jobs. And so in places like, let's say, around Los Alamos, a lot of the tribes there their hands are tied because of agreements with DOE or DOD. And so I'm not sure with Navajo Nation why it is so hard to do the cleanup that we need. Right now, a lot of it maybe they say it's going to be too expensive, or a lot of it is based on funding. And so it's really confusing to me that the federal government can't clean up the mess they made when they're putting trillions into making more waste through its weapons complex.
And following these issues like you do and being aware and going to different meetings, have you seen any justice, or do you see justice for Native people impacted by these issues, whether it's an acknowledgement or cleanup or compensation?
No, I think there's non-native communities where the federal government has, they've done complete cleanup by moving huge piles of waste in white neighborhoods or in places where water resources might be at risk. But these are not on the Navajo Nation. And so I don't think in anywhere in the world there has been cleanup to pre-mining conditions. And so when you say justice, first we think about human justice. We think about the people and what they want. And most people who had been impacted by uranium mining were not given first the information. They were not educated before the mining started. So a free, prior, informed consent was not there. A lot of times the background radiation levels were not recorded. So how can you determine if the cleanup is just? So for me, I think the just thing would be to not do uranium mining. When a community says no, the federal government needs to listen and not make the mess to begin with, because there has never been any justice for the cleanup, for nuclear experiments on human lives, for the waste piles that are blowing all over the country. And the saddest thing is our relatives, many of our relatives have died not knowing that they died from radiation exposure or as a victim of the Cold War, or, basically for something they had no idea, they did not consent to.
And these issues are, being talked about a little bit more with the new Oppenheimer movie being released. You saw it. What were your thoughts?
I went to see the movie because as a person who works on uranium mining, my focus is more on the human impact at, we call uranium mining the front end of the nuclear fuel chain. And the back end is the nuclear waste. And so I'm not an expert on the weapons complex. I'm very aware of the uranium coming from Africa, from Shinkolobwe uranium mine, where people were mining it with their hands. So we talk about the injustices to Dene uranium miners, but imagine the injustices to people in Africa. Like today we're hearing about the cobalt mining by children. So the mining that occurred for the Manhattan Project was incredibly dirty and contaminating and went unaccounted for. The governments and the industries don't even mention Shinkolobwe uranium mine. And so I want to start there. I mean, we can go all the way back to the doctrine of discovery and the tools of colonization that we are aware of today that resulted in the stealing of our lands. And so going back to the Oppenheimer movie, they took the uranium from Africa. It traveled all over the country to be processed, and they finished the project here on stolen lands. And this is something that many people don't know, that the first test was also here in New Mexico. And so the people, the downwinders of the Trinity test, they were never acknowledged, informed, apologized to, or compensated, by the federal government for using not just their lands, but basically making them guinea pigs in this first nuclear test. And so when I saw the Oppenheimer movie, I was just looking for any evidence of uranium mining or evidence of New Mexico. I mean, besides the beautiful landscape, I think the actor's belt buckle was maybe a silver belt buckle made by some native person. Other than that, it was complete erasure of the theft of land, the environmental impacts, the history, not just in New Mexico, but across the world and the country, of those that were impacted by the Manhattan Project, who are still impacted today. It also didn't talk about the deaths in Japan, the people who, some of them were vaporized, and the things that happened there, the atrocities, were completely left out of the movie. July 16th is the anniversary of the Trinity test. So on July 16th, there's people in New Mexico that remember that day because it's the first day there was a nuclear test. On July 16th, 1979 was the Church Rock spill. So we have two nuclear disasters that are remembered in two parts of the state on the same day. And then a couple weeks later, in Japan, they have their commemoration on August 6th and August 9th. All of these were left out of the Oppenheimer film, the human impact. And then the other things I saw from the movie were just not just the erasure, but the extractive nature of colonial forces, such as taking not just the resources and the physical materials to make the bomb, but Oppenheimer was in love with New Mexico. He loved this land. He wanted to combine physics and New Mexico was, one of the lines in the movie. And I remember cringing when he said that. It hurts, inside my body. I don't know how many times during the movie the theater was completely filled. I was feeling like so many emotions, but you're in a public space, and so the hurt, the anger, the rage, there was a lot of emotions that I felt throughout the movie, but I think a lot of it, the bottom line is I wasn't surprised. There was no surprise that Hollywood, a film written, created by, what I want to say is that this film is basically rooted in white supremacy and is continuing the status quo of erasing the true nature, the true history of our country in order to perpetuate more nuclear violence.
Well, thank you for sharing your views on the movie and also just giving us a little history of the impacts of not only the Navajo Nation, but other indigenous people here and around the world. And before we end our conversation, just a little bit about the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act. This is something that you're watching.
In the film, they leave out a lot of the human impact. So the people of the Marshall Islands, the Western Shoshone, a lot of the different stages of the bomb. The film does not include any of the human impacts. So I don't know if you saw the film, but there's these marbles they use they put it in a jar to celebrate how much plutonium was produced at Hanford. And so they have I don't know if you've watched the film, but there's two glasses. And so in one glass, they put a marble in for how much uranium they've produced. And in another jar, they put in a marble for how much plutonium they produced. When they were dropping in those marbles and all of the actors were celebrating, to me, that was representing, if you know how much uranium it takes just to produce one little marble, or maybe one little pellet that's in a nuclear fuel rod, the amount of uranium is huge. To get that much uranium, there's probably thousands of tons of radioactive waste left behind at the mine site. Contaminated water they use to process that uranium at the mill site. All of that contamination that is erased. I can see it in those little marbles. All of that suffering, all of that cancer, and those people were never compensated. That's what was left out of the movie. I mean, people just see marbles because they're probably made of glass. But the reality is, those are people's lives. Those are our families in New Mexico. That's how many deaths that were not accounted for. Right now, there's this thing called the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act. In New Mexico, like I said, we have several facilities. There was so many nuclear facilities. We're a nuclear state, not just the uranium mining and the enrichment I mentioned. But what's happening now in the world is they're looking at developing more nuclear power because they're saying it's going to save us from climate change. And then at Los Alamos National Labs, they want to increase the plutonium pits. So all of these things collectively it's funny to talk about cleanup, and it's funny to talk about RECA, because RECA is just a little Band-Aid on this huge problem that the United States needs to stop creating. So RECA, the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act, is a fund that was created specifically for people who were impacted by the nuclear weapons development. And it includes some people that are eligible for it, and there's a lot of criteria to apply for this fund, but Diné people and other people who were minors or impacted can apply for this fund. However, it was going to sunset last year. And so it's an incredibly important thing for not just Diné people, but people downwind of the Trinity site, and then also people who worked as uranium miners after 1971, because these people were not included in the first RECA law. Right now, RECA was supposed to sunset last year, and because of the Tularosa Basin Downwinders Consortium's work, Post-71 miners and others, Navajo Nation, a lot of entities worked together to extend RECA, but there was only a 2-year extension. So right now, there's a proposal to extend it for 19 years, which is great. It should be extended in perpetuity, but this extension will include recognition for the downwinders of the first atomic blast, as well as others who were not included in that first RECA package. And right now, it is only an amendment in the Defense Authorization Bill. So the Senate has passed this RECA amendment, which is great. This is the furthest along that RECA for this particular expansion. However, the House needs to put the same conditions in this Defense Authorization Bill in order to see it pass through Congress. And so it's a good time if people are hoping to get this compensation or want to see that this compensation is passed. This would be a good time for anybody who's concerned to reach out and talk to their elected officials in Congress.
Well, thank you so much for joining us here today on New Mexico PBS.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Antonia, for covering this important topic.